As we mentioned yesterday, the life divine is the metaphysic of Sri Aurobindo. Sri Aurobindo made it a special point to emphasize that he was not a philosopher and he didn't write philosophy in the accepted sense. Philosophy, as it has been understood in the West, is a mental theory, speculation of the reality, world, man, nature. It is mentally woven. Each one takes a certain principle and weaves an entire structure around it. But in the East, philosophy is called darshana, D-A-R-S-H-A-N-A. Darshana is an intimate vision. It is not something that is arrived at mentally, but it is a rendering in terms of the mind of an immediate spiritual realization. It is in that line that Sri Aurobindo's life divine is to be regarded and studied. It is based entirely on his experience. He observes somewhere that he has not written a single word without experience. And he started presenting this life divine as early as 1914. He revised it much later, about 25 years thereafter, adding a few chapters here and there, developing certain concepts based upon his further experience. And the life divine, as it stands at present, consists of 2 volumes. The first volume, comparatively, relatively simple, dealing with the omnipresent reality. He does not admit, the title signifies, any fissure in the reality, that the reality is there and this is unreal or inferior. He does not admit. The reality is omnipresent. The second volume consists of 2 parts dealing with knowledge and ignorance and spiritual evolution of consciousness. It covers a vast field, but one feature of Sri Aurobindo's presentation to be noted is that he never bothers to refute the positions or the arguments of other philosophies. He states what he has got to say and leaves it there. He does not controvert unless it becomes necessary to sustain his argument. And he covers a very broad range of concepts, thought experience, what's the reality, and what's the place of this universe in the totality of the divine existence. Is there a divine? What is consciousness? What is matter? What is life? In what way are matter, life and mind related to the divine consciousness? Is this a cosmos or a chaos? If it is a cosmos, what are the orders of the worlds? The different states of consciousness, the waking, the dream, the sleep, and the superconscient, and the various levels of human consciousness, the waking, the half-wake, the subconscious, the unconscious, the nascent or the inconscient, similarly the superconscient, and the various levels of spiritual consciousness, and the meaning of life, the direction in which we go, the why there is evil, why there is falsehood and suffering, if all is created by the divine, by God, the difference between soul, self, spirit, God, Ishvara, Brahman, the Absolute, and the way of evolution of individual consciousness relating to the evolution of collective consciousness, where humanity is heading, what are the possibilities, what are the probabilities, what's the next stage in evolution, and why what he says is the ultimate stage of this cycle is the next stage that he speaks of, the ultimate one, or are there further stages? Now, these are some of the various topics he discusses, and it is not everybody's meat. One does not understand the life divine unless one is ready for it. There is a need in the being to understand that message, that approach. I have known brilliant intellectuals who have not been able to go beyond the first few pages and said they don't understand anything. I have known fairly illiterate people who are not even graduates, who have understood life divine very well, who have derived joy from life divine, and whose life has acquired a meaning. So life divine, it requires, it is not a philosophical treatise. It is an intimate communication from one who has experienced those things to humanity, which is getting ready for the next stage in evolution. I wouldn't think of taking you chapter by chapter or even volume by volume in our study of this masterpiece of Sri Aurobindo, but I would give a general outline of the thought so that what is to follow can fit in this perspective. Now, the ultimate reality is ineffable. The human mind cannot analyze, cannot describe, cannot grasp the reality as it is. In the Upanishads, it is described how mind and speech fall back when they try to touch that reality. It remains beyond speech. The tongue falters, the mind fumbles because it cannot be conceived, it cannot be mentally analyzed. So the reality in itself is unknowable. Is the unknown. We call it the absolute. The absolute is something beyond human categorization. So that's the absolute, above the human reach. But the unknown is not unknowable. It is not knowable by the mind in a mental way, but it reveals itself in its own manner to our uplooking consciousness and to our experience. The reality that is turned towards manifestation of which we are a part lends itself to be experienced in three broad terms. First, to speak our human language, we experience that exceeding all, beyond all change and modification, there is an existence, a sheer existence, that is called Sat, S-A-T. When everything is abolished, still there is something, and that is Sat. It is existence, sheer existence. But that existence is not an inert or a dead existence. Its nature is that it is conscious. Consciousness is the nature of this existence, and this consciousness is called Chit, C-H-I-T. Note that this Chit or consciousness is not just an awareness. It is not a static awareness, but it is dynamic. It has a power. It is a power. So we call it consciousness force. Consciousness as force. When Sri Aurobindo puts a hyphen between consciousness and force, it means consciousness as force. In Sanskrit, we call it Chit Shakti. CHIT dash SHAKTI. And the nature of this consciousness is delight, bliss. They call it Ananda. So these three, they are not really three parts, but it is reality turned towards this creation, experienced in a triple way. It is a triune reality. You can't experience the one without at the same time experiencing the other two. So Sat, Chit, Ananda, existence, consciousness, bliss, is the highest triune reality. And this reality is infinite. It is unbounded. It is also eternal. It is not bound by time or space. It is the infinite and the eternal. Now, when this Sat Chit Ananda, which can very well exist by itself, it is a sheer self-existence, conscious, blissful. It dwells in itself. But when it chooses to manifest, to bring out what is held in its bosom and organize into a universe, it localizes its idea. It chooses certain truths to be manifested. The potentiality in the being of Satchidananda is infinite. But for manifestation, it chooses particular truths to be organized, worked out and manifested in this universe. Maybe it will choose, or it has chosen other truths in some other cycle, and it will choose other truths in a subsequent cycle. But in this cycle of manifestation, it chooses certain truths, and it organizes these self-existent truths, gives them a focus, and takes a creative poise. This is called the real idea. The real as the idea to proceed upon. And this is the supermind. The supermind, or the gnosis, Gnosis, is the name for this status, self-assumed status of Satchidananda in its creative poise, with the specific truths to be manifested, organized. And that is the supermind, the fourth. Now these three, Sat, Chit, Ananda and the supermind, in Sanskrit we call it Vijnana, V-I-J-N-A-N-A. This Vijnana is to be distinguished from the Buddhist Vijnana. The Buddhist Vijnana means quite something else, but Sri Aurobindo's Vijnana has the Upanishadic connotation of the super mind, the super knowledge. So once organized at the what is called the supermind, the supramental status, the fourth status, thereafter it moves down on the lines that have been previsaged, that have been foreknown. The one starts at the supramental level. The one organizes itself into the many. What was one truth places itself in a number of statuses. So the one and the many are equal truths, with the one having an edge over the many. And then it proceeds further downwards, where the many preponderate. The one stands in the background. So the extreme action of the supermind, whereby the one stands behind and the many preponderate, that is the overmind. And thereof overmind is the beginning of the lower hemisphere of which we are a part. Now this process of the descent of the reality, a formless reality to take form, an infinite reality to finitize itself, an eternal pouring itself in time, this is manifestation. The process of coming down is called devolution. And this overmind, through successive levels of descent, leads to mind. And thereafter, that consciousness which comes down, it goes down and plunges into a very opposite of Satchidananda. Sri Aurobindo points out that the object of this manifestation is that the glory of Sat Chit Ananda, it wants to realize itself here in the completely opposite conditions. So when the movement of descent, when the movement of devolution touches its last point, existence turns into non-existence. Consciousness turns into nescience, no conscious, unconsciousness, inconscient. And bliss turns into no sensation. The devolution reaches its point, last point, when everything becomes opposite. But the consciousness, the seed of consciousness is there. and that goes on prodding from behind, from within, to come out. In occult traditions, Mother describes how when the divine soul plunged to carry out this task of manifestation, it plunged headlong and lost itself completely in the nadir of descent. And when it was about to lose itself, it sends a cry to the divine. And the parent divine acts directly, not through the various planes, but direct descent of grace. The first action of grace is when the divine grace reaches directly and picks up the soul. And the return journey starts. This prodding of the consciousness, which is essentially divine, to return, to come out of this imprisonment, is called the estrus. It is the nisus, that constant urge to come out, that acts. And the return journey starts with the formation of fragmented matter joining together. Slowly there is life, slowly there is mind, and this process of return journey is called evolution. Evolution is not of the form, not of the body, but of consciousness. As the consciousness reaches each level, it builds for itself a suitable dwelling, body, form. But the law of evolution is, even as Teilhard Chardin confirms, from the simple to the complex. The more complex the consciousness gets, the more complex the structure of the form. So it is the consciousness that determines the form, not the reverse way, as Darwin and others would have us believe. Now this return of the consciousness is called evolution. And evolution can reach its culmination only when this consciousness that has descended from the divine reality reaches back its nature of divine reality. When each one of us, when every form evolves, develops, grows, and puts on the divine character, then the evolution of that form is complete. Now this is the broad outline. Now the exact operation. When the reality descends, it forms planes of existence. It doesn't descend in a straight line. It doesn't just jump. It organizes itself. That is Sat, Chit, Ananda, the supermind. Then it organizes the overmind. These are called planes of consciousness, levels of existence. And on each plane of consciousness, there are several worlds. A world and a plane of consciousness are not interchangeable. Each plane of consciousness is based on a particular principle of consciousness. So we have the overmind, then we have the intuitive mind, then we have the illumined mind, then that there are several gradations, and then we have the mind, the life and the physical. Now these planes of existence are there long before the earth has come into being, and they are exerting continuous pressure upon the earth to evolve, to release what is hidden, what is held in its bosom. All is embedded in the earth, and the earth is the field of evolution. There are other planets, true, but evolution is not their law. The higher planes, the higher worlds are what are called typal worlds. Each world has its perfect systematized organization. They don't exceed, they don't come down. But a thing like developing, changing, growing from level to level happens only on earth, because the evolving soul principle, what Aurobindo calls the psychic principle, is only embedded in earth and nowhere else. Now these planes go on exerting the pressure. Just for instance, as matter is formed, there is a push from inside, a pull to the higher life plane to help the involved life to come out. The life that is involved, the life energy or principle that is involved in matter cannot emerge unless it is helped by a downward pressure from the life plane functioning on its own. That pressure releases life force. I wonder if it would be appropriate for me here to mention that Aurobindo's last work, Savitri, it is an epic, the longest epic in English literature, of 23,000 lines and odd. Now there, it is his testament to humanity. He himself described that it is life divine in poetry. And there he describes the whole cosmogony of the universe and the various, in 200 pages, 15 cantos, he describes in one book the way order of the worlds, how there is first the physical, then the subtle physical, then the life, then the various grades of life, mind, grades of mind, and so on. And there he describes how when material earth was there, the gods involved in matter, the little souls, entities involved in matter, they cried and cried, appealing to the life force to descend. And in response, the life force comes to the earth and all starts becoming green and things start moving and running. And that is a picturesque description of the descent of life in matter when matter is ready by its own churning, by its own struggle. Life, when it is formed, it goes on developing some small to more complex forms and all that. And ultimately, at some level, the beginnings, obscure beginnings of mind start. And they develop into the mind at the human stage. There also, there has been a continuous pressure and a descent from the mind world, mind plane, on living matter to release the hidden mind and to organize the mind. We are now, all of us, in that stage where the mind creation has organized itself. There was an age when it was entirely a physical creation. There was an age when there was no mind but only life, moving vitality. And now for some millenniums we are living where mind is getting organized. There are various levels, all don't have the same level development of the mind, but mind is organizing itself. There are levels of evolution, but that's not the end. Mind, by its very imperfection, by its very limitation, shows, and it is given glimpses that there are other planes of consciousness, other realities above the mind, enveloping the mind. And the human evolution, the Earth's evolution, is being precipitated into another phase where what is beyond mind will erupt both from earth and from above. And that is what Aurobindo calls the supermind. All the defects of mental knowledge, all the pain and suffering and evil of this world, these, he says, are phases of a process. We have not yet arrived at a culmination. We are in the midst of a process of evolution, and lot of dirt, lot of dust, lot of scaffolding, all things are there. And what we see today is not the end of things. They are transitional stage. As mind gets organized into something more, as mind opens to the glories of the spirit, which is beyond, consciousness widens, ignorance and products of ignorance will recede. And why did this ignorance come? Why did this happen? He says it is what he calls exclusive concentration. When you are working, if you are concentrated, you lose yourself in the work and you are not conscious who you are or where you are. Similarly, in the labor of evolution, so that exclusive concentration of the manifesting soul, it forgot itself, everything. And this led to what is beginnings of ignorance and inconscience. Slowly, as a result of labor of evolution, it is recovering. Knowledge grows, ignorance recedes. It is a process. And looked at from this point of view, this is a growing manifestation of a divine consciousness which is slowly evolving itself in multiple forms. The true character of life, he says, is bliss. In his chapter, Delight of Existence, the Problem, and Delight of Existence, the Solution, he says, all tradition, particularly Indian tradition, says that from delight of God, all this has come to be. By delight it is sustained, and into delight all it disappears. If delight is the cause and delight is the base of existence, why don't we see that delight in our daily life? Why there is so much of pain, there is so much of shadow, so much of stress? Says it is because we have lost the art of living. We, each one of us, we are limiting ourselves not only in the walls of our body, walls of our ego. We put ourselves separate from everybody. So the life force, the mind, everything that is really infinite, we force it to be narrow. We range ourselves against the whole universe. Naturally, when a universal contact impacts on me, I shrink, I avoid, I have pain. The way out is to expand, to give up my self-limitation in the ego, to refuse to be driven by ego-dominated desire, to recover my unity with others, which I can do only at the level of the self. So I have to exceed my present formation, and in the measure in which I do it, life changes its character. And he says, if we were to total up all the unhappiness in this world and all the happiness, the sum of happiness will be more. That is why nobody wants to die, in spite of all trouble, all pain. Everybody wants to live. The will to live. It is because life is meant to be lived. Life yields joy. And place of evil, he analyzes the place of evil. He says, where is the question of evil really? Animals don't have sense of evil. An animal, a tiger, doesn't feel sinful when it eats a lamb. It is with the development of the human mind that the sense of morality, that the sense of sin, evil has come. It is a phase. But he says, the real way to face the problem of evil is not the standard religious posture. All religions assume that God is sitting there. He has created this world and we are all suffering and He is above, leaving us to fight with evil. And evil has been created by an anti-God or something as a part of something else. But Aurobindo says, no, the divine is here as well as there. He has not only manifested, created, but He dwells in each particle. He is not only the transcendent, but He is the indweller. He cites a passage from the Upanishad in which he says, He was alone. He desired to be many. He created forms. And having created, He entered into each. So the divine has entered into each form. He is evolving Himself in each form. He is suffering all the pain and the consequence of this evil or suffering. Adversity. God is Himself suffering, if suffering it is. But what is experienced by us as suffering, what is experienced by us as pain, is not registered in that manner by our soul. The evolving soul reacts to the normal sensations of pleasure and pain in a different manner. It is our sensational mind our limited being, that reacts to this as pleasure as pain. But there, deep within, the soul, the evolving being, welcomes difficulties, welcomes suffering, what we call suffering, as a means of quicker growth. It is like doing exercise in the hard way. So there, what strikes as pleasure outside may be felt as something else. What strikes as pain may be felt as joy. So it depends upon the level of consciousness on which we function. Upon that depends our registration of life experience. And to grow, we are hardly conscious, he says, of 1/10 of our being. What our consciousness is like the tip of an iceberg. We have still to become conscious. We have to still to open up areas of our existence and being which are yet untapped. And in the measure in which we grow, enlarge our consciousness, we get control, we have knowledge. And as a corollary to this law of evolution, reincarnation, rebirth is a must. It is impossible to turn the whole gamut of evolution in the course of one birth. Rebirth, series of births, series of rounds of experience are necessary, inevitable, and each life experience adds a little to the stature of the soul. Evolution has rebirth as its machinery, and the law of karma, action and reaction. There is an interchange between all the worlds and the earth. This is at the basis of the teaching of the Hermetic teaching. As there, so here, as here, so there. There is a continuous interchange going on between the various worlds that intervene between our physical world here and the Satchidananda there. This is the substance of the life divine, that we are all moving towards a truly divine life. The divine is growing. In each one of us, the divine is growing to the extent we permit him to grow. If we are confined to our ego, desires and passions and little life activity, he doesn't get enough scope. So we speak of disciplines, we speak of enlargement of consciousness, enlargement of vision, evolution of growth. And he says in Savitri, the epic of which I spoke, God shall grow up while wise men talk and sleep. I think we can take a break. To proceed further, in Sri Aurobindo's thought, there is no such thing as sin, S-I-N, neither original nor aboriginal. Sin, the only sin is ignorance. Deviation from truth due to ignorance of truth is all the sin. And this is corrected by growing in truth. There is no moral sense, moral connotation to this sin. Now, what is ignorance? We facilely believe ignorance is absence of knowledge. It is not just mental knowledge, want of intellectual knowledge. It is not. In a very important chapter in the Life Divine, he speaks of sevenfold ignorance, and our evolution, further evolution, is from sevenfold ignorance to sevenfold knowledge. In terms of these transitions, our evolution is measured. And the first type of ignorance, he speaks of 7 ignorances. The first ignorance is what he calls the original ignorance. Ignorance that there is something, an absolute, which is the source of all our being. We don't exist by ourselves. We derive our existence from something else. Now this ignorance is what he calls the original ignorance. He describes, we are ignorant of the absolute, which is the source of all being and becoming. We take partial facts of being, temporal relations of the becoming, for the whole truth of existence. That's the first, the original ignorance. Our origin we are not aware, and we think whatever is before us, that explains everything. And this original ignorance has to yield to the knowledge of the Absolute as the origin of all things. I would put it that there is a divine reality. There is a reality, and that reality is divine. That is the origin of all things. We all derive from a divine reality. That's the first corrective to our original ignorance. Next, there is the cosmic ignorance. We are ignorant of the spaceless, timeless, immobile, immutable self. We take constant mobility and mutation of the cosmic becoming in time and space for the whole truth of existence. That's the second, the cosmic ignorance. That is, we identify ourselves, we lose ourselves in this process of change, time, space, limit ourselves, forgetting that behind space there is a reality that is spaceless. Behind all the mutations of time, there is an eternal which supports the becomings in time. So this cosmic ignorance of the true state of the cosmos, that it is not in change in time and space, but there is something, immutable self. The knowledge of the self, the spirit, the being, and of the cosmos as the self's becoming, the becoming of the being, a manifestation of the spirit. That's the knowledge we have to arrive at. Being and becoming. Now, this is a very important distinction that Aurobindo makes. Being is, it just exists. Becoming is, it puts out things from itself. So many forms, so many movements, so many things. Without losing itself, it is putting out. So the becoming does not cancel the being. The being is eternal. It renders itself in so many movements, in so many forms, and that is the becoming. This cosmos is not self-existent, but it is a becoming of the divine being. This is the knowledge that we have to acquire instead of being limited by what is called the cosmic ignorance. The third ignorance is the egoistic ignorance. We are ignorant of our universal self, the cosmic existence, the cosmic consciousness, our infinite unity with all being and becoming. We take our limited egoistic mentality, vitality, corporeality for our true self and regard everything other than that as not self. That's the third egoistic ignorance. In simple words, to think that our egoistic self is everything, forgetting that there is a universal self, forgetting that there is a larger cosmic existence from which we derive. That is the egoistic ignorance. Fourth, what he calls temporal ignorance. That is, we are ignorant of our eternal becoming in time. We take this little life in a small space of time, in a petty field of space, for our beginning, our middle and our end. This is the fourth, the temporal ignorance. Self-limitation to a point of time, thinking that it is all. This is temporal ignorance. Next is psychological ignorance. Even within this brief temporal becoming, we are ignorant of our large and complex being, of that in which is the superconscient, subconscient, intraconscient, circumconscient to our surface becoming. We are lost on our surface superficies. We take that surface becoming with its small selection of overtly mentalized experience for our whole existence. That is the fifth, psychological ignorance. And then there is the sixth, the constitutional ignorance. We are ignorant of the true constitution of our becoming. We take the mind or life or body or any two of these or all three for our true principle or whole account of what we are, losing sight of that which constitutes them and determines by its occult presence and is meant to determine sovereignly by its emergence their operations. That is, the truth that gives meaning to mind or life or body. That we forget. We think mind is self-existent, life is self-existent, body is self-existent. But there is something else behind which governs all of them. So we do not know our own constitution. This is the constitutional ignorance. And last, as a result of all these ignorances, we miss the true knowledge, government, and enjoyment of life in the world. We are ignorant in our thought, will, sensations, actions, return wrong or imperfect responses at every point to the questionings of the world, wander in a maze of errors and desires, strivings and failures, pain and pleasure, sin and stumbling, follow a crooked road, grope blindly for a changing goal. That's the seventh, the practical ignorance. The ignorance which is a result of all the other 6 ignorances, which makes us lose our direction in life, stumble here and there, become unable to meet the contacts of the world with the right response. That is what he calls the practical ignorance. Now these 7 ignorances, they are to be changed into 7 types of knowledge. Now, the original ignorance must yield to the knowledge of the Absolute as the origin of all things. The cosmic ignorance has to yield to the knowledge of the Self, the Spirit, the Being, and of the cosmos as the Self's becoming, the becoming of the Being, a manifestation of the Spirit. Cosmos is not self-existent. Cosmos is a result of a reality which is anterior, which is higher, which is deeper than the cosmos. Then the egoistic ignorance, our limiting ourselves to our surface ego, it has to be corrected by a knowledge of the world as one with us in the consciousness of our true self. We are not separate from the world. We are not divided from others as the ego would make us believe. The world as one with us in the consciousness of our true self, thus cancelling our division from it by the separative idea and life of ego. And the temporal ignorance, self-limiting to a point of time, that has to be corrected by the knowledge of our psychic entity and its immortal presence in time beyond death and earth existence. Our experience, our existence is not terminated by a death. One life is not the beginning and the end. We carry in ourselves a soul, a psychic entity which is immortal, which is eternal, and it continues beyond death, beyond earth existence. Psychological ignorance has to yield to the knowledge of our greater and inner existence behind the surface. All the various studies of psychology and parapsychology are opening up the various paths to acquire knowledge of the greater and the inner existence behind the surface, which is all that we know. And the constitutional ignorance has to be replaced by a detailed knowledge of the mind, life and body in its true relation to the self within. You cannot get to understand the mind, the life and the body, what they really are, except when you study them in true relation to the self within and the superconscious, spiritual and supramental being above them. And finally, the knowledge of the true harmony and true use of our thought, will and action, and a change of all our nature into a conscious expression of the truth of the spirit, the self, the divinity, the integral spiritual reality. That is, to arrive at true harmony and the right use of our thought and will, and make our nature a conscious vehicle of a greater truth. That has to substitute, that has to replace what he calls practical ignorance. So this chapter, from sevenfold ignorance to sevenfold knowledge, is one of the most important chapters in the Life Divine. And one cannot read it enough. Life Divine is a book which has to be read again and again. It is not a thing that you once read and mark the pages and leave it. The more times you read, the more you understand. And it is a book that gives you spiritual food. You may not realize that strength-giving character of Life Divine in its first reading. But the more you read, there is a music in the prose. There is a rhythm in the sentences. They say sentences are long, but you can't help it. I have known Sri Aurobindo writing pithy short sentences, like bullets. But the subject, the theme governs the style. He writes in a different style when he writes on the secret of the Veda. He writes quite differently when he writes the Life Divine. And when he writes Savitri, which, as I said, is the quintessence of his experience, of his teaching, of his vision. How whole evolution started. How? What is the account of science? What is the account of religion? What's the account of spiritual traditions? What's the account of occult traditions? Why all this has come? What necessity had God to create this imperfect world? What is man? Is man the final term? He says, speaks of man as the imperfect God who hurts himself at every step. Man who does not know beyond his next step. Short sentences. They haunt. We speak of mantras. Savitri is a series of mantras. Those of you who are interested in studying may please contact our friend Dr. Richard Steiner, because at his place we are studying Savitri every week. We have a study circle which has been functioning in this city for a number of years. They have studied Life Divine, they have studied synthesis, they have studied works of the Mother, and now they are going to take up Savitri. It is more not as an intellectual study, but as a spiritual exercise, to link ourselves with the consciousness behind these words, that we are doing it. And I just thought I should mention it, since I saw a deep interest here, though it is no part of this course that we are doing to bring in the study circle or things like that, but those who are interested could benefit. And And I understood life divine completely only after reading Savitri, because he makes it so easy, and it is the most mature work of his. He was busy writing that, dictating that, even 4 weeks before he passed away. And still it is not complete. It is his testament to humanity. As I said, the whole cosmogony of the worlds, the debate between life and death, how the divine grace descends in human form to conquer death for human beings, and the various ideologies. What's the truth? The gospel of love. What's the truth behind love? Beauty, aesthesis. What's the truth behind our grandmother's tales of fairies coming and giants coming? He says it is true, and he describes how things are happening, how denizens and spirits of the other world interfere with us, and how do they interfere? We are small, we are unconscious. It is in our moments of unconsciousness that the wrong spirits get an opportunity to interfere in our lives, cause accidents, bring about confusions. There is some truth in all these stories. We dismiss them as old superstitions. He speaks of beings whose very gaze is a calamity. It is true. And these beings, they are not disembodied beings. They possess people. They act through people. They act through circumstances. And how the various worlds are interconnected. From each world, what inspiration comes to this earth? From where inspiration for beautiful art, music comes. For adventure, wars, battles comes. For spiritual experience, what happens after death? Where do we go? All that he describes in a manner which no person that I have known has described in that detail. Even Swedenborg, who has taken pains to describe some of the worlds beyond the physical, is not that accurate. Even in theosophy, where a lot of books are written, there is a lot of certain things are doubtful. Here he describes verifiable and verified experience. And if not as a part of the course of study, but for your own development, I would recommend sometime in your lifetime, you should all read Savitri. The name is Indian, but the theme, the development, the language is universal. Name Savitri is the daughter of the sun of truth. That means the divine grace. Divine grace. It is an old legend in the Indian mythology, which he has converted into a saga of the descent of grace for conquest of death, to make it possible one day for the human to go beyond death. What causes death? What causes sickness? Why these confusions? What is the way out? They are very elaborately argued, described, and when you read it, it is a spell. It is a spell that acts. And epigrams, single line epigrams, 2 line epigrams. It says there is a book of fate where he discusses what is fate, what is determinism, what is free will. Dramatic situation is there. The king, the queen and the sage, all these argue. So there is a dramatic background, making it interesting. And there he says, Speaking of pain, pain is the hammer of gods to break a dead resistance in the mortal's heart. Without pain, nobody would progress. Pain. Through pain, man is goaded. Pain is the signature of ignorance. He says in another place. And speaking of fate, he says, the soul can accept its fate, it can refuse. Now I think you can ask me questions. I have done with the main argument of life divine. And
may I ask where these study meetings are held that you were just mentioning a few minutes ago? And where are they though?
They're held at Wednesday evenings at my apartment.
Oh, Wednesday evenings. At what time?
Well, because of the class now, we'll probably be meeting about 8:15 or 8:30.
And where is your apartment?
52 Alma Street.
52, which street?
Alma, A-L-M-A.
A-L-M-A. Whereabouts is that?
It's over near Houston Met Center off Cole Street.
Yes.
Well, last night,
Savitri here. There is life divine here. There is the synthesis. So I have just covered an outline of life divine, but the books are here. But Savitri is a book, which I think all of you would enjoy having it.
it said that you understood Life Divine only after reading Savitri. Which would you
Fully.
recommend reading first?
It's also true. I understood Savitri because I had read Life Divine earlier.
Which comes first, the chicken or the egg?
I think it has to be simultaneous.
Okay.
Simultaneous. The first volume of Life Divine and simultaneously Savitri. You all please leave out the first two cantos. They are very symbolic. Start from the third canto.
I winced to hear you say that because some of the poetry in the first two is so beautiful.
Yes, but it scares away many people, readers. It's the most difficult. He spent the most time on those, chiseling that canto, first canto. He wanted it to be a model of perfect perfection. And one can always read it afterwards, Once you get into the swing, thereafter you find difficult portions, you know how to deal with them. But in the beginning, if you take the most difficult portion, people don't go beyond the first 6 lines. They just say, no, we can't understand it. But if you start with the story portion, it becomes easier, interest.
I have a question.
Yes.
Not on the books, but on what you were talking about. Kumaraswamy writes that the translation, or what appears as translation as ignorance from Sanskrit in English, often carries the implication not of the absence of knowledge, but the ignoring of knowledge. Does that apply to the levels of ignorance that you were speaking about?
I don't think. His conception was different. He was an aesthetic,
Yes, that's true.
and I think it is a very limited field compared to this sevenfold ignorance. It may be a part of one of these ignorances.
That's what I was
Yes.
saying, that it might be a
Yes,
part.
it is a part.
All right. Yes.
It is a part.
I had a similar thought about ignorance when you were talking about that it's not just not knowing something in the mind, but that there may be an awareness of something in the mind, but the actual part of the being, like the vital part of the being, may not be sharing the knowledge that is known in the mind. It's an issue that comes up much in therapy about people having intellectual insight and yet nothing changes in their life. And there's some ignorance in this other part of the being.
Yes, exactly. Knowledge and ignorance are not limited to the mental.
There's a knowledge in the body.
Yes, there is knowledge of the body, knowledge of the heart.
Are you saying that the ignorance is an absence, knowing?
No, ignorance, I would say, is incomplete knowledge.
Incomplete?
Sri Aurobindo says ignorance is incomplete knowledge.
What about deliberate? Like what if you know something and you go ahead and do something, let's say, like the level of the Nazis or something really bestial or really evil? On that maybe a moral category, but what about the things where there is some knowledge,
But still you do.
But a choice?
It is an extreme result of ignorance, which is called falsehood, anti-truth. You know it is wrong, and still you do it. That is falsehood, deliberate falsehood.
That's
It is an
level of ignorance then.
an extreme result of ignorance. It is a perversion, a deliberate perversion. Ignorance is innocent.
Somewhere in the first volume, in the first book of Life Divine, when he's describing the descent of consciousness from overmind to mind, he describes the process by which falsehood emerges out of ignorance, which I can't recall now.
It is limitation, limits itself and puts behind the knowledge of unity, the knowledge of one, basing and containing the many, is forgotten. That's the beginning of ignorance. And the complete division that takes place thereafter as a result of this forgetfulness is falsehood. That I am separate and you are separate, that is falsehood. Not to know that we are all one is ignorance. But this functioning on the basis that I am separate, you are separate and you are against me, that is falsehood. To set myself against another as my opposite, that is falsehood.
There's a notion I'm not sure where in Greek philosophy it comes from, but Jung refers to it often of an antiodromia, that if you go far enough into one pole of a pair of opposites, at the extreme you meet the opposite pole, or it turns into the opposite pole, that love can turn into hate, or that ignorance could turn into knowledge, or darkness, light. And it seems that in the play of multiplicity coming out of the unity, that's one of the principal operants.
I think there is some truth there. Love-hate relationship, we say, even in daily normal life. But it's a hard way to realize the truth.
Back into the reincarnation issue of abortion,
Yeah.
which is so common
Yeah.
now, especially in this country, would fit into something like that. How does that interfere?
Well, the question is, when the soul does not enter into the womb till very late, even there are differences of opinion when life enters. Life, some say that at the moment of conception life enters, but we don't accept that. Life force as such enters at a certain stage, but the soul does not enter till about the time of delivery. So you are not killing a soul, you are not harming a soul. Say if there is abortion, say before 6 months, somewhere round about the 8th month or so, the soul starts entering. It is a very powerful soul, it does not enter till the body is delivered. And that also, if it is very powerful, even afterwards it stays in the atmosphere, prepares the body, and when it is ready to support it, it enters. It may be 1 month, it may be 6 months after the child is delivered. So no case does the soul enter before 6 or 7 months. So you have to consider the question of abortion from that point of view. You are not harming a soul, but they will say you are harming a life. You are killing a life, but even life does not enter till the end of the 3rd month or so.
What do you mean by life?
Life energy.
A separate life
Mm.
from the mother's.
Yes, separate life, an individualized life, which will develop in that later on.
I'm curious about this process. If it were a highly developed soul which were to enter the child at a later time in the birth,
Yes.
what would be the relationship
Ah.
between the mother and that child before and after the entrance of the soul? How would that be? Do you have
I think
experience with
the
that?
relation will be of the bodies, that's all.
Merely physical.
Yes, of the bodies.
Would there be a difference between such a child and other children who have...
Yes, you will find such children extraordinary.
Really?
Yes, extraordinary capacities, their work. There will be mature souls who have had a long past, who come for specific work, who come for some transitions in consciousness, and an ordinarily born body can't support it immediately. So it is being prepared by influence, by atmosphere, by vibrations, and then slowly the soul enters. Mother was a great expert in these matters, and she told many things in these.
Can you tell the story of that boy who stays at your house?
Yes. So I have a boy in my house, That boy came to our ashram when he was 6 months old. So he was taken to the mother. Mother was sitting like this here, and there were pens and papers and all on our table. So the mother of the boy and they came. I was standing there, I introduced them. 6 months, this boy was very shy, never would look at other people except his mother. He immediately jumped from his mother's arms and stood on the table and started caressing mother. Like this, he like this, like this. And mother just allowed him to do that. Afterwards the boy's attention shifted to the pens and all that. He started taking pens and things. Afterwards mother said that one of the inmates of the ashram, a very strong devotee of mother, he had died some 1 or 2 years ago. It is that soul which has come in this body, and that soul recognized her. That's why I took all that liberty. And that boy is growing up in my house, very remarkable, almost a genius in many matters, highly interested in past civilizations, occult matters, magic, astronomy, and very sensitive. He's taking only raw foods. He doesn't take even now milk and things, milk products. And he feels his sensitivity enhanced by these raw foods.
How old is he now?
14.
It was his decision to do this diet.
He took this diet about 2 or 3 years ago. He read somewhere and he wanted to do that. He didn't want the fried stuff and we in India, we overcook food, frying and things like that. This speaking of reincarnation, there is a point I would like you to know. That is, in many religious mythologies and religious superstitions, they say you go back to animal birth. Now it is a law of evolution that once you enter the human stage, you can't go back to the animal stage which you have crossed normally. But still, occasionally, maybe 1 in a million, what happens? A soul in the animal belt, it always aspires, these souls aspire to come to the human stage. So it may be that some such soul or a soul entity has prematurely entered the human body, wanting it. The divine law is one of freedom. So it enters in the human body. There it finds that it cannot stay in the human body. It is too weak. A human body has its own pressures. And then there is conflict, difficulty. Now the whole thing was brought to a focus for us was, we had a boy in the ashram. He was something like, mentally undeveloped, queer and funny. And he would come to mother, and we found mother was giving undue attention. She was very kind, she was very loving, and very solicitous about that fellow. She was so kind. And once she explained, after he passed away when he was 15 or 16, he passed away. She said it was his first birth in the human body, and he was struggling to adjust himself. Because of this inability to adjust, the mind was chaotic and there was difficulty. So occasionally such souls, they go back, prepare themselves and then come to the human level. Very rare. Otherwise normally there is no regression in evolutionary development.
How did he happen to be at the ashram?
His parents were devotees. The whole family came, and he was the 4th son or 5th, like that. So the whole family was permitted and he stayed.
I'd like to ask a question in continuation to her question. In an abortion, the soul has nothing to do with the abortion itself. Is there any karmic consequence for stopping the process?
It's a very good question, very good question. If life has formed, there is a karmic consequence. Both to the person who asks for abortion and to the doctor who does it. There is, if life has formed, there is a karmic thing. If life has not formed, it is like cutting off a tumor or something. It has no effect.
How about when people say that some births are consequence of commitments before birth? The mother or the father had a commitment with a certain souls to bring them down. And then by pressure of society, material problems or ego considerations, they decide not to have it. Would that be a further?
Yes, it will be a betrayal of trust, isn't it? It will be a betrayal of trust if one is committed to give body, to give birth to a soul. The commitment is somewhere else. If you fail here, it is a karma again. Yes, it is.
What about in terms of stillborn babies and miscarriages and that sort of thing? Is that part of their own?
It is usually accident. Accidents take place, and particularly it is a result of the psychological imbalance, disharmony between the parents at the time of conception, and the disturbed atmosphere if it continues after conception. It always shows in certain disabilities in the children that are born, and particularly handicapped children. They are due to this kind of disharmony, conflict between the parents. I am speaking all this from the occult point of view. And particularly if they are drunk, if they don't have control over their own senses, it does reflect in the baby.
But then the soul that, for instance, would enter that baby, then that would become that soul's path.
Yes.
To have to work through its handicap, through all that.
What happens? The soul has already chosen that parent, those parents, and it gets into it. And the parents' defects it has to bear. Many times mother used to describe how when the soul wants to take birth, it sees a point of light on earth. A point of light showing which is the place most suited for its experience in this birth. But when it comes, many times there are these anti-elements which deflect, which accidents take place, and they find a wrong birth in some other body. And often when a soul realizes that it has entered a wrong body, it leaves the body pretty soon. That is how many children die early. Apparently they have fever or something, they need not die. But such unexpected deaths and things usually have a history behind them. That the soul realizes it has not entered into the right body, or this body is not going to help it to have its experience, it withdraws. An accident may take place, premature death, something may happen. But these are all not to be applied in every case. These are general principles of working.
Would you say more about accidents?
Accidents are really, they are called accidents because they are not a part of life, intended part of life. Accidents are interferences with the regular flow of life and experience. And these interferences take place as a result of the intervention of various elements, entities, which are swarming in the subtle physical atmosphere, always waiting to create confusion, cause harm, and they thrive on the ill will, jealousy, black thoughts of people. And when we are unconscious, negligent, those things get an opportunity. So Aurobindo describes in Savitri how when in our small petty moments, in our dark negligent moments, they get a chance. They hit at that time. So much so that there is a very ancient tradition that in the great epic of war between the right and the wrong. So one dynasty, the head of one branch of the family is ranged against another branch. A huge war is going on in India. It's called Mahabharata. So there, in the midst, the battle rages for 18 days. So one day when his side is losing, the old man, he is a blind man, the emperor, he calls his minister and asks questions. He says, these are very profound questions, I can't ask. But if you like, I shall summon with my yoga power a divine sage who can answer your questions. So he says, yes. So the divine sage comes, and the first question he asks the emperor is, Sir, what is death? Is there death? And if there is, what is death? The sage replies, death there is and there is not. Heedlessness is death. That is, when you are unconscious, when you are negligent, you are dead. When you are conscious, you are alive. So each one of us, we have moments of death, we have moments of life. To increase our moments of life is the path of progress. When we just let things go, happen, we don't care, anything may happen, well, we open the doors to all these accidents, confusions, and they are all agents of death.
How would you distinguish between negative karmic consequences and sin? You've said there was no sin. What is a negative karmic consequence?
Well, you see, I create my own karma.
Yes.
Nobody else creates my karma. If I cheat, if I betray somebody's trust, if I kill something, I forge my karma, which I have to pay or work out. Well, the religions may call it sin. I have committed a sin, they will say. In killing, I have committed a sin. It is nothing, no sin question at all. Question of action and reaction. It rebounds on me. So, point is, God does not punish. Man punishes himself. Human beings punish themselves.
But why there are so many human beings we do not see? They don't see, they don't feel, but just they
Yeah.
finish themselves. Why? Why there are so many like that? Many
They are not yet developed. Evolutionarily, they are not developed. The more you are evolved, the more there is a possibility that you are sensitive and you feel and you think. There are many who are still in the animal stage, and they see nothing else except what Sri Aurobindo calls the physical man, the vital man, the mental man. Last comes the spiritual man, spiritual being. So they are not yet graded to that level. So we have to leave them to their way and not impose upon them what we know. Each one has to evolve and develop according to one's own nature.
I was curious yesterday, and you're telling us the story of Mother's personal life.
Yeah.
What was her posture towards her husband? It seemed like he was a distant figure in the
No, she had a regular married life, and ultimately when she decided to stay in India, her husband didn't want to stay there. So they separated. He came to America. He was a professor or something in Florida or somewhere. He lived to the age of 92. He's a brilliant man. But it was a regular married life.
For how many years was she married?
You can say,
Living as a
no,
wife?
she had her first husband was an artist by whom she had a son. He is still there in France. He is a big industrialist. And he was an artist. Then she separated from him because you see, that artist found her too great for him. You see, and so she separated. Later she married this gentleman. So you can say till 1920, 1878, 20, about up to 40, she had a married life, 38 to 40 years.
In several of her books, she talks about not encouraging the disciples to marriage and interacting with the females within the ashram too. And I was curious in how that extended out into Aurobindo.
No, Aurobindo, it is yes. This thing is not. It was only confined to the ashram community. No sex and things like that. But she regarded sex as a normal part of life, and it is there as a part of life in Aurobindo. Only she says sex must be a culmination of love and not of desire. As you evolve higher and higher, sex loses its meaning if it is not a product of love, and that's what she emphasizes.
In the sense of considering oneself a disciple of Aurobindo and the Mother, is it a requirement that one not be married or
No.
involved with
No,
family?
no, not at all. Not at all. Not at all.
In other words, celibacy is not required
No,
in
no.
the Aurobindo discipline.
No. What is required is really is conservation of energy. Conservation of energy as far as one can. It does not mean celibacy. In our ashram community is different, but normally for the large number of people who accept them as their teachers or follow their discipline, sex is not tabooed.
What about promiscuous sex, which is so popular?
Oh no, that is absolutely, that is very much frowned upon.
Rajneesh, I understand, permits any amount of sex, any place, anywhere. And so
That is why you see, he didn't have a following in India.
he didn't have a
No,
following.
98% of his
Immense
disciples,
following amongst the hippies of this
98% of his followers are from America and Europe.
country. The drug takers, the drug addicts.
In India, he didn't have disciples, and it is contrary to all spiritual tradition.
On the other hand, Dr. Joshi, who was the dean of this college for some couple of years too ago, after Dr. Joshi passed away, he was a disciple of Rajneesh. But I don't think he subscribed to that particular aspect of his teaching.
But anyway, now Rajneesh has come to America.
Yes.
He's a good riddance for India, but I don't know what I could say.
More disciples than anybody ever had. In numbers, at least.
Sure, Pandit. I was curious, in the way that things seem to be moving, as far as the traditional family unit, where people would turn for a lot of support and stability and whatnot, those things just seem to be crumbling in so many
Yes.
different areas. And I was wondering if you consider that part of the evolution where people must learn to turn to more inner guidance rather than the dependence on, let's say, mother, father, family, where you find yourself completely alone and suddenly it's, well, where can I turn now? And it seems like the outer
That's what
traditional stability is so crumbling in so many.
that's what mother felt. But there is a period of chaos is bound to be before that ideal stage is reached. But she was firmly of the opinion or conviction that the family now is an outmoded institution and it will not survive.
What is the context in which children are raised in?
Well,
Did she
yes, she looked forward to an age where children would be looked after by experts in eugenics, health, nutrition, and educational psychology. He said that stage will have to come. And don't know. I personally can't understand all those implications. I am an old world man, and I still feel it will be a disaster if a child is deprived of its mother's love in its infancy. You see.
Isn't there somewhere also that she says, though, that with the development of consciousness, adults will relate to all children as their own children. There won't be that my child ego attachment, and that when that love is coming from a larger group or community, the deprivation won't be there.
And we have seen developed children with a developed consciousness, they don't have much to do with their parents. They don't look to them for support, They are highly individualistic. Children born today are more individualistic than children, say, about 25 years ago, all over the world. They have a different stuff. And they know more at their age than we did at that age. Human consciousness is evolving, progressing, changing.
On TV last night, I saw a most extraordinary showing of a child about 18 months old who had been exposed to very advanced scientific conversation, illustrations, and teachings, and already was talking on the level of a university professor.
I see.
Extraordinary.
I see.
And about 18 months, I mean, it's a tiny little kid. I think
Yes, yes.
I'm not positive of its age, but a tiny
Yes.
little kid. And this man who had been teaching the child, I don't know whether it was the father or not, because I turned the program on a little bit after it had started. But he produced a large illustrated chart type of thing, large piece of paper. And it had a drawing of, I don't know what, but some sort of a cellular development, and a part of the growth or development of something or other, I don't know what. And it was divided into a lot of different segments and colors, and on the side there were smaller sections illustrating other aspects of it, and highly technological words to describe these different things. I can't remember, they were words I'd never heard before. I'm pretty well educated, but not in a particular science, whatever it was. And the teacher pointed to different parts of this diagram and said, "And what is that?" And the child
I see.
obviously knew what it was, understood all the structures that were being talked about. And these are things that you could only find out by the highest degree of magnification, and intense scientific study. And this little child understood everything, because the professor asked him many questions, probing questions, and how would this interact upon that? And the child could describe it. Extraordinary. This was somewhere in some university center over on